Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the May 25th, 2023 Lcar meeting. Before we get started, I'd like to go around the room, around the table.
Mark McDonald, Senator from Orange County, Natural Resources and Finance Committee.
Anthony Dexter Cooper from the Office of Legislative Counsel.
Ginny Lyons, Senator representing Chittenden Southeast, Chair of Senate Health and Welfare and on Senate Appropriations.
Scott Baumgartz, I represent Arlington, Manchester, Sandgate, and part of Sunderland in the House, and I serve on the Environment and Energy Committee.
Rafe, representing Addison County, serve on the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee and the Finance Committee.
Carl Odie, I represent Farming North End of Burlington. I serve on the House Ways and Means Committee and on the House Ethics Committee.
I'm Representative Mark Higley from Lowell. I represent Orleans Lamoille District, and I serve on the Government Operations and Military Affairs Committee.
Representative Trevor Squirrel, I represent Underhill and Territory on House Appropriations.
Lisa, I am the Administrative Assistant of Legislative Operations.
Okay, first order of business are the minutes from April 27th, 2023.
Make a motion, we approve the minutes.
Motion to approve the minutes of April 27th, I'm sorry. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Okay, first we have a fairly full agenda today, and get going right away. Rule 23 PO1, Department of Finance Regulation, Privacy of Consumer Financial and Health Information. And I don't even know if I want to even try to pronounce his last name. Carla Nuzio?
Carla Nuiso. Thank you.
Okay, welcome. It's all yours.
Thank you. Good morning. So I'm Carla Nuiso. I'm the Director of Market Regulation at the Department of Financial Regulation in the Insurance Division. And the rule that we are is the privacy of consumer financial and health information. And the rule essentially provides how companies can share information and also on the privacy notices that they have to provide to consumers. The rule was based on the federal law, the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act. So it essentially enacts federal law or mimics federal law. And one of the things, what we're seeking to amend is the requirement to mail annual privacy notices. Federal law was amended, I think about 4 or 5 years ago to say that companies didn't have to send an annual privacy notice if their privacy, if nothing had changed, and that as long as they make it available to a consumer on their website. So we actually made this change in the banking division several years ago, right after the federal law was enacted. And we have been encouraged, we've been being asked by insurers if we would change the requirement here because it creates a lot of sort of unnecessary mailing of paper to people that probably don't often read it. So we are seeking to amend that requirement. And I think there's a few other technical corrections, but the main impetus for this was just to alleviate that annual privacy notice requirement. So I guess if anybody has questions or if I can clarify anything else, Diane Sherman's here with me to help if we have questions.
Any questions?
It sounds pretty straightforward.
Senator Lyons.
I'll make a motion that we approve Rule 23P01, Privacy of Consumer Financial and Health Information from the Department of Financial Regulation.
Motion from Senator Lyons approving 23P01. Any additional discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Rule 22P28, Department of Public Service, Vermont Residential Building Energy Standards. I'm not sure, we got a bunch of people on the list here. And for the Department of Public Service, who's taking the lead?
Morning, I believe Keith Levinson will be taking the lead. Morning.
Sorry, who again?
Keith Levinson, Department.
If you want other folks to join you, you can pull the chairs up, but that's fine.
If we just pull the chairs, that might be.
Pull through here, huh? Why don't you start by all introducing?
Sure.
yourselves?
So I'm Ben Civiletti with the department.
I'm Keith Levinson, the lead for the Residential Energy Code Department.
Richard Fazy with Energy Futures Group in Heinsberg, a consultant to the department supporting the code development.
I'm Chloe Wander. I'm the Assistant Director of the Efficiency and Energy Resources Division in the Department of Public Service.
Well, we're here to present the update of the residential building energy standards, which is required by, I won't quote the statute number here, but required by statute periodically after the update of the International Energy Conservation Code. And you have in front of you the red line and the amended code language. Questions?
Yeah, we certainly could provide a little bit more detail on the final proposal, but we thought perhaps with the agenda, it might be best to jump into questions.
I have a general question I'd like to put out there. I think you've seen a lot of the comments that we've probably received. I wonder if you could speak to some of them.
Sure. Well, I think, Keith, do you want to start on that?
You've probably heard the comments, the primary comment we received during the process was on the lack of enforcement of the codes. And I just want to defer that question. It's beyond the scope of this rulemaking. You're here to update the code language. Enforcement is a separate, much related subject. We also heard a lot of comments on the cost effectiveness of this rule update or the code update. We are required to make updates that are cost effective to the customer and to the homeowner. And we feel we have done that, and we've responded to a lot of the comments from builders in particular who feel that the incremental cost of going from the current code to this code is not cost effective and is not affordable for the homeowner, for the eventual purchaser of a new home. And we have heard those comments. We've done extensive analysis and reanalysis with our consultants to come up with a package that is cost effective if you were to take a mortgage on the improvements compared to what code home would be in the current code. Your monthly expenses, including energy costs, would be less than they would be if we had not updated the code. So from day one, this is cost effective. It's cash flow positive for the homeowner. We have it from the initial proposal to Lcar. We have made several changes, 3 in particular, in order to address the issue of cost effectiveness. Unfortunately, we're in a situation where we have high mortgage interest rates. Fuel prices have moderated so that the value of energy savings has also moderated. And the cost of the incremental cost of building materials and construction costs, et cetera, are inflating rapidly. So we're in a difficult economic situation, but I think we've successfully addressed the concerns of the building community and others, the affordable housing community, by changing specific provisions of the code to address those costs. And those particularly are the window U value. So I'll try not to get technical, but the efficiency, the R value of windows has been rolled back to its current level. The wall insulation levels have been rolled back to their current level. And we've also eliminated the requirement for solar-ready construction for base code. It still applies to the stretch code, but not to base code. So those three changes in particular have reduced the cost of this package of improvements so that it's cost effective for the homeowner from day one.
Representative Higley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a lot of concerns with this. I actually put in a bill during our S100 housing bill to postpone action on these standards for 2 years, like a lot of folks have requested in here. I looked extensively at a lot of the folks that gave testimony, and, you know, it appears that anywhere from $17,000 to $28,000 is what it's going to increase the cost of a residential house in regards to these standards. I guess as far as a couple of questions go, I noticed in your extensive list of folks that were involved in developing the rules, there wasn't, GMP wasn't in there, Vermont Electric Co-op wasn't in there, small utilities weren't in there, and I guess the first question I got is why was that?
They were free to participate in the process. I don't believe we had any representatives of the utilities other than Efficiency Vermont.
And Burlington Electric Department.
That's true, yeah. Burlington Electric did participate in our advisory council and our public hearings. So we did have input from the electric utilities. Primarily the concerned parties, mainly the building community, affordable housing, developers, architects, designers, those types of folks were well represented, and you know, we're open to all feedback from concerned parties.
If I can, Mr. Chair. So you had mentioned a little bit about it already, and that's some of the concerns around, there's no education around this, there's no inspection, and there's no enforcement. And a lot of the comments, again, talk about pretty severe issues that could result from improper insulation and not having the proper ventilation, that sort of thing. There was just recently a Vermont Digger story that was huge on spray foam insulation. I'm a general contractor myself, so I'm aware of the changes in the industry, which is pretty amazing when, you know, at one point in construction, you can look at what industry standards might require, and then all of a sudden it changes. So again, I have a real concern with a lot of what I read in here with these updated standards, from everything from making sure that your electric system is totally capable of handling complete electrification of the homes. The U value and R values are getting more extreme. It's important. You know, I can just give you an example as well as a house that was built. The individual didn't live in it for quite some time, went to sell it, and the radon was so extreme in the basement that they had to put in a radon system to expel the radon from the basement. And I believe that was partly because of nobody living there, and that place was, you know, spray foam, completely, you know, sealed up a little bit too tight. So I guess my concern and another question that I've got is, and I looked into this when I proposed a bill to suspend action on these for a couple of years, is what is your anticipated date of enactment?
We anticipate late this year. Our target date is
December 1st. Okay. That helps me a little bit because I did find out, my concern was, let's say a construction outfit had a contract or was involved in putting together a price for construction. And my understanding is once these new RBESs go into effect, the contractors are going to be required, whether it's commercial or residential, to abide by the new rules.
Correct. The commercial code is separate, may possibly have a different effective date, and the cutoff date as to where you have to adhere to the current code versus the new code. The rules on that are slightly different with the commercial code, but for residential code, you have to substantively begin construction before December 1st for it to be covered under the current code. And after that, it would be the new code.
And is there any provisions around ability to waive any of that if an individual did have a contract going forward over a year and request that to hold true to the contract figure, they could fall back on the 2020?
There are no provisions for that in a Act 250 type multiple unit development situation. We've gotten questions about that. There's no clear answer as to, if you break ground on the first unit of a 12 unit development, to all 12 units have to adhere to the code that's in effect when the construction starts. I think the answer to that is yes. It's a legal question that I'm not really qualified to answer.
Thank you for that. And I guess that's it for now.
Senator Bray.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Representative Higley, for asking those questions about trying to make sure that we get the benefits that the new codes are aimed to help Vermont achieve, and consumers, being consumers. So I just wanted to check in I'm trying to remember, and I'm guessing this. Priority housing projects currently have to build to code, and my recollection is it might be that they build to stretch code. Is that? Can you remind me if it's stretch or the regular code for priority housing projects?
Priority housing project, I'm not sure. If they're under Act 250, they have to adhere to stretch code.
Yeah. Okay.
So I guess that's the defining criteria.
So thank you. I just wanted to make sure. Off on this rule is meeting legislative intent yesterday, and I brought the sheet with me. So just to sort of put my cards on the table where I am at the moment. And I'm looking at S100 for instance. So we have that in priority housing projects. We've been through a lot of analysis over the years to say, although building to a stretch code is more costly up front, was a cost-effective investment. And especially since priority housing projects aim to be affordable, especially for the long haul, we've built that into statute. So that's one of the reasons I'm supporting the change. The concerns I heard about inspection and enforcement, S100 does address that, and that we create a study group in S100 to help sort this ongoing problem out with having split interests between department and Department of Fire Safety over code. So we know we have work to do, but that falls, I think, to the legislature, and the rule itself, I think, is intact and meets legislative intent. So yes, there's an issue there, but I don't think it lands on this rule per se. It lands on us as a legislature to address how we would better implement inspection and enforcement. And, to the ventilation issue with radon, for instance, I can remember getting an energy rated home certificate in 1986. And one of the things it recommended was continuous ventilation for the house, because as you tighten it up, you wanted to make sure you had plenty of fresh air. So thanks for the answer to that question. And I just wanted to speak on behalf of the rule. And I think actually I would move, I don't want to end conversation, but just to be clear about where I am, I'd move approval of Rule 22P28.
Second.
Just a motion on the table, we have a number of other witnesses.
Sure.
Yes, appreciate that. Senator Lyons.
Thank you. So I'm looking at your ROI attachment that you have, and the issue was brought up that this could cost between $17,000 and $18,000 more. And you have tables in here that go up to what, $13,000, $12,000 or $13,000. Can you talk a little bit about how you're looking at the return on investment, what we're currently getting, what our folks are currently getting under the current standards, and then what improvement will we see with the new standards, if any?
It's a difficult question to answer succinctly. What we were comparing in our economic analysis is the incremental cost of going from the current code to the same house constructed proposed code. So it's a bit of an artificial comparison, but that's how we find cost effectiveness of the update. So in doing that comparison, the cost of the incremental changes, if you were to roll those into your mortgage, would result in less increase in your mortgage payments compared to the energy savings that would result from those same incremental changes. I don't know if that's how you were thinking of it, but that's how we did the analysis. So the cost side of that was where we heard a lot of feedback from the builder community, from the affordable housing community, and we responded to that. The initial cost effectiveness analysis came back as cash flow negative. So in other words, it would not be cost effective for the customer. The way we responded to that is to roll back some of the incremental changes. The cost that you quoted, I believe, was from one of the builders.
No, it's in Appendix A.
Excuse me?
It's Appendix A.
Oh, okay. If that's in our documentation, then that was our previous estimation of it. That has now changed with this new proposed rule. So.
Yeah, I just want to add two little things. We received, when Keith said the cost effectiveness was negative, this was after receiving additional cost information from some builders. And that's why we adjusted. And then the point about the cost effectiveness being based on the previous code to now, that's actually in statute. It says the amendments need to be cost effective. So that's why we do the analysis that way. Just want to clarify.
Okay, I do have another question. The rules indicate that there's a 3-month period within which the rules begin, and then new construction must abide by the rules. And how does that 3 months play out?
Well, it says, I believe that it says that it can't be any sooner than 3 months after the rules adopted, and we would be proposing basically 6 months. Like Keith said, we would propose the effective date not be till December of this year. So it would be a 6-month period before, if it gets adopted, before they would go into effect.
Okay, thank you.
So what we're looking, I'm just following up a little bit on that. What we're looking at here doesn't yet reflect the changes you made after Lcar, or it does?
Oh, it does.
It does.
I thought I read that it still has the chart.
Yeah, there's two sets of tables. Table 4 or 3 in the economic impact analysis is after we made changes.
Okay.
And table 4 was the previously filed. So that shows what it was before we made the changes.
Okay, I had thought that I had read it already.
Yeah, we tried to.
But you took that out though, right? Wasn't that one of the things you said you did?
Solar.
Oh, solar.
Yes,
Okay.
solar ready.
Okay, got it. Okay.
And we took that out because it had cost and no
Okay.
energy savings.
Okay.
That was why we took that out, to make sure it was cost effective.
Did you consider putting a table of contents in with the rules? That's what
No, but that would have been helpful.
it would have been.
Sorry. We only do, our department, this is the only rule we do, and we only do it once every 3 years. So sorry, we're probably not as savvy as other state agencies.
Senator Bray.
I have a question for our council. So Ms. Launder was just referring to a implementation 6 months after approval. Is that specified? Do we have to do anything to specify that? Or is it just, it's always an option as to how rapidly a rule is actually deployed?
So under the APA, the Administrative Procedure Act, for purposes of a permanent rule, the rule could not take effect until 15 days after adoption. You will sometimes see an effective date included in a rule. Sometimes you'll see it like July XX where they're not filling it in. But when the effective date is specified is in the final adoption forms that are filed with Lcar after approval or moving forward if Lcar doesn't approve. And those are also filed with the Secretary of State's office. So you don't always see that effective date in the materials that you have. Charlene will see it when the adoption paperwork is filed. That's one of the questions that needs to be answered then. In the case of this rule, and it's in statute and you've heard it alluded to, but if you flip to the back of your packet and 30 VSA section 51, you're going to get in subdivision C2. Each time the RBES are amended by the commissioner, the amended RBES shall become effective upon a date specified in the adopted rule, a date that shall not be less than 3 months after the date of adoption. So they eventually need to have the effective date be in the rule, but they're not required to tell you it now. It just needs to be at least 3 months after adoption.
So I don't know if there's any, if it's at all appropriate to modify the motion to approve to include a 6 month period, or if that's sort of improper under APA. But the one concern I did hear was that changing things too fast is disruptive.
So I think the way to do it, and it would need to be DPS sort of approved, is, you know how when you approve a rule with proposed modifications, you could have the proposed modification be that the effective date not be earlier than December 1 of 2023. Lcar can't do that unilaterally, but I'm seeing nodding and it looks like there might be agreement if that was your motion.
Yeah, we wouldn't want it any sooner, frankly, because we have to do all the code materials after the rule's adopted. We work with ICC to get all the code books and stuff together, and that takes time and it needs to be done though before it goes into effect. So we would want to leave ourselves 6 months to get all the materials prepared. So we would be fine with being directed to do it no sooner than December.
Dotting the i's and crossing the t's. What is that date?
December 1st, 2023 was what the department was going to propose as an effective date.
So then, Mr. Chair, if I may, I modify the motion to include a proposal of amendment to specify that the effective date not be sooner than December 1, 2023.
We have an amended motion on the table. Questions? Sorry.
Well, my question was going to be, why wouldn't we try to have the effective dates coincide with building seasons so that, for the logical reasons, December 1 means anybody building after December 1 would have to be purchasing equipment or resources before December 1 to comply with those, with building.
That's a question I want to ask some of the contractors, is what is the time for their inventory, if they have any, and then the purchase time prior to construction. All those issues come up when you start talking about timing. The department is speaking for itself, which is important, to get all the code books and everything in order and sending it out to folks in the community, but it'd be good to hear from others. I agree with you, Senator.
Any other questions for this group? Thank you. I'm sure you'll be here to answer questions that come up. Is Jason Webster here? Jason Webster is co-president, owner of Huntington Homes.
Hi. So I'm Jason Webster, one of the Langston Homes. We're a builder here in Vermont. We've been building in Vermont since 1978. We've built about 5,000 houses, half of which are here in the state, half of them are in the rest of New England. And I'm really here today. I would really like to give kind of the view from 30,000 feet about the way that building codes, energy code is one of them, and how they kind of actually work, and what truly is missing in Vermont with our energy code today. In doing that, I want to tie back, I want to kind of make 2 points in doing that, tying back. One of them is to, in the enabling legislation of the of RBs and CBs, it does say very specifically that any amendments to RBs needs to satisfy a 3-prong test. One of those tests is technical applicability. And so I want to talk to that. The other way I want to address this is that in Lcar's review of a proposed amendment, it requires Lcar to look at the proposed amendments. One of your tests is, does the proposed amendment satisfy the intent of the legislation? So I want to come and have a look at that. I'm going to be, because there are some other people that don't want to. Technical applicability. Since 1997, when RBs was enacted, it really is a building code like no other energy code or no other building code is administered anywhere else. Vermont truly stands alone in how it administers its energy code. The energy code really is just kind of a wish that says we wish these kind of energy efficiency goals, but behind that wish, like everybody else has, is no agency that's administering the code, right? Every other state has a full agency dedicated to amending a code, adopting a code, certifying contractors, training contractors, inspecting contractors, and certifying. Since 1997, the Vermont legislature has not given Vermonters or Vermont builders that agency. It's just given us the wish that we want energy efficiency. Up until today, that wish has been fine because the provisions of the energy code really have been along the lines of good building practices, and it's been along the lines of what we've all done. This amendment right here, 2020 to 2023, is the first amendment where the technical requirements of the code are going beyond basic building practices. It's requiring insulation strategies, it's requiring insulation systems that builders haven't been trained to build, right? There are some builders that are doing it, but the majority of builders are not doing it. So kind of back to the legislation, technical applicability, I would argue that the proposed code is not technically applicable because the rest of the program needed to oversee a code is not in place. Further, I argue there was a great article in Vermont Digger this week about foam insulation and well-intentioned clients, well-intentioned installers that installed foam insulation wrong. Here we are 8 to 10 years later, and we're starting to see catastrophic failures, building failures in these assemblies. This new code proposal requires those assemblies. This is not, that's it, like that's the standard, that's the floor. And I think it's really, really dangerous to be requiring an insulation strategy that we haven't been trained on, and there's nobody there looking at us to make sure we're doing it the right way, right? So there's a technical applicability part. The other, Lcar's review is supposed to take into consideration the intent of the code. And does the proposed amendment satisfy the intent of the code? The intent of the code is energy efficient construction. I argue that that the proposed amendments aren't satisfying the intent of the construction. In order to use numbers so that everything's relative, so we can see everything here, energy efficiency, there's a rating system that's used for energy efficiency called the HERS score, Home Energy Rating System or Standard Score. You take a bunch of information about a house, you throw it into a piece of software, and then that software kind of gives you a score as to where the house is going to land. Every other state, the international model, energy codes use this HERS rating. The lower the score, the better. A score of 0 is a net zero energy home. So a score of 0 means that the home produces as much energy as it consumes. The state energy goal is to get to 0, right? The 2020 RBs has a target, has a wall insulation and mechanical standard to target a HERS rating of 61. The proposed 2023 RBs has a target rating of 54. 54 is lower, it's better than 61. The last DPS study was done in 2015 as to how many houses without inspection were actually being built to meet the code. And in 2015, when the HERS score was 65, right? So 15, we were at 65, current code's 61, new code's 54. At 65, a HERS rating of 65, there was only 54% compliance. There is no reason to think that as we tighten up the standard and without inspections, without compliance, that compliance rate is going to go up. Now, us, Vermont versus everybody else, Massachusetts standard today, right? Again, today Vermont is at 61. We're proposed to 54. Massachusetts standard today is 52. Massachusetts standard 1 year from today is 42. We built a lot of houses there. They have near 100% compliance on their target energy scores because they have the full code program behind it, right? They actually inspect, they actually certify, they actually train their builders to do it. So without the legislature having given us the actual agency, the DPS creating the rules that are around it, we are not going to meet the energy goals. We're not going to meet the intent of the legislation on the path we're on. What the rest of the building community, the architects, what we're all asking you to do, we're actually telling you right now, we're on the edge of requiring very dangerous building assemblies that most of us don't understand. We're right on that edge. What we're asking to happen is that we pause and we do not approve these amendments. We stay with 2020, which is standard building practice. There are some studies right now on the enforcement issue. There are some studies as to how, coming next year as to how that agency might be in place. What we are asking is that we stay where we are until those are in place. Then we can leapfrog forward and actually hit our energy goals with that full agency in place, because we just, the path we're on right now with the system we're on right now, we are not going to get there. We're not. Thank you.
Questions? Senator Bright.
So thanks for your testimony, and you remind all of us that there's a big legislative lift ahead outside of the rule, which is to create a sort of regulatory and educational infrastructure, compliance infrastructure to help the rule be more effective. In terms of Huntington Homes, just so I want to be thoughtful and careful about, impacts on your business. Within the proposed code, my impression was that there's enough flexibility on how you meet the code. Like the HERS rating has different variables you can tune, that you could meet the code and do it in a way that you feel is, structurally sound, or won't lead to wall assemblages self-destructing in 10 years.
You shouldn't be concerned with Huntington Homes. You shouldn't be concerned with the builders that are in this room. What you should be concerned with are the 47% of the contractors that weren't even building to the code in 2015 that are going to be that are going to miss the proposed code even more going forward, because they don't know those tools. They don't know what it is, because the state has not given us the certifications or the trainings to know what that is. Right? So it's not the people that are in this room that you should be concerned with going forward. It is the majority of the contractors that aren't in this room that you should be concerned with.
And so just a really quick, brief question and answer sort of thing, because I know we have a folks to get to. In Massachusetts, who does the training in Massachusetts?
The state. So the state, there's a full agency that is tasked with adopting and amending codes, right? And that's a full process. And when they do it, this is another part too, is that Vermont, because we've only had an energy code, and in single family residential, we don't have a building code, we don't have an electrical code, we don't have a plumbing code. And so in Vermont, the energy code has always kind of stood on its own, and it's just been looked at and amended based on energy only. No other state does it that way. Every other state in that amendment process, they layer in building, electrical, and plumbing, and they adopt the IBCC model code to take into consideration other things. Because there are conflicts. There are conflicts between IBCC and the IRC. And these agencies kind of smooth it out and amend it. They don't just look at it singularly as energy.
Other questions? Okay. Thank you, Jason.
Okay, thank you.
Colin? Vice President Sterling Homes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Colin Frisbee, the owner of Sterling Homes. I grew up in Vermont, native Vermonter, lived around the world serving in the military, moved back to Vermont. I'm a mechanical engineer by schooling. I understand a bit about thermodynamics and some of the pieces here. I participated in, Richard could probably correct me, at least the last 3 review processes with the department, and have given my opinion throughout those. And I find today a little bit of a bizarre world, because I am usually the last person that would be recommending that we need more enforcement and that we need more government. That is not normally my bent. I am normally quite the opposite. I'm also, by nature, you can argue either frugal or cheap, but cost is very important to me. That's not why I'm here today. I think what is proposed, I second Jason's suggestion that we delay the enactment of the changes until we have my wife is a teacher, so I've learned some of the language of scaffolding around the ability to execute it and execute it well. Executed poorly, it is going to be dangerous. I believe that it is a health and safety issue, there are lots of other issues, but primarily focused on the health and safety of Vermonters. Will us builders be fine? Will we still be able to make money? Yes, we'll be fine. Will Vermonters be better off? My humble opinion is no. I think what these new rules push us towards, as Jason said, a precipice of significant changes. we have to change, we have to grow, we have to do things better. But we have to do it in an informed manner and in a way that keeps at least the normal standard deviation of folks on board and doing it well. There are a bunch of the technical aspects of complying with this code that, if done almost right, become very dangerous. The article in BT Digger was an interesting one. I was talking to my plumbers this morning. They were going through a story of doing it in their own house. Very common sense, smart guys got talked into doing some spray foam and have water running out of the ceiling last week because of the condensation issues. These are people who install mechanical ventilation every day for us. They are smart, hardworking, good Vermonters who want to keep people safe and who are very scared about what this does to us. And so I think I'm normally the last one to be arguing for enforcement, inspectors, and all of that. But because of the safety piece, and because the changes go from traditional building practices, and I'm not arguing against moving forward and getting better, but without the scaffolding around us to do it as an industry, as Jason said, those of us who are testifying or partaking in these processes probably have a leg up in terms of understanding of these things. The average typical person out there that is building and the average typical Vermonter who is buying is not as informed to ask the right questions to get the right answers, because people are making mistakes even when they really care and they want to do the right thing. Just to be clear, recommend delaying setting up the scaffolding around it so that it works well. Previously, a question was asked about materials and timing and what how much time we need as an industry. I would argue that we order with 2022 was the great supply chain. Everybody now knows about supply chain and all of that. And so the supply chain continues to change, but we are ordering many materials well before breaking ground on a home at this point, as it is the only responsible thing for us to do. Windows, doors, some of the things in question here. Also the drawings. It is not just materials that will be needed to comply with these rules. The drawings will need to change because you're going to have different wall thicknesses. You're going to have different door assemblies, window assemblies. You're going to have a whole bunch of these things. And when you're having a discussion with a client, those discussions with clients pre-construction happen over a period of time. I would think that a more reasonable timeline would be at least 6 months after we receive the results of the department's updated manuals and all of that. In the past, the manuals are coming out on about the effective date. Fortunately, in those cases, we weren't changing wall assemblies. We weren't changing things other than things we could order. In this case, to do energy efficiency well, it has to be designed into the building. There is not some piece you can buy at the end that is going to make your home more efficient. It has to be designed in and built in by craftsmen from the beginning throughout the process. And so having ample time to understand that, build that into the process, I think would be helpful to the whole piece. It also falls in line with the idea of delay.
Questions? Senator Brady.
Good question. So I don't want to take it, but I'm happy to learn from each guest who comes in. How do you keep up with good best practices for walls, et cetera?
That's an excellent question. Jason's got us beat by a year. We were founded in 1979. I'm a second generation into this. We are part of a builder group that is non-competing builders from around the country. I'm a enthusiastic continuing learner, not so much from the classroom, but buildingscience.com, Joe Steebrook, professional development classes, webinars, all of the different things. But the education within Vermont has fallen behind, and I don't want to conflate issues, but Efficiency Vermont used to provide a bunch of support in the education and knowledge process for the building to code, and that was fantastic. Efficiency Vermont has, in the last number of years, has only provided that support to people who are going well beyond code, beyond the stretch. And so that is excellent for those people that are going beyond the stretch. You now you're preaching to the choir, so to speak. You are preaching to the people who are trying to do it right. And that's good and that's helpful. But we need to make sure that we are educating all the builders who are trying to do it. And right now, the way to get educated, the only way I have found to get educated is to seek it out and figure it out. And as a business owner, a small business owner in Vermont, it's doable, but it's not easy. And it is not a whole bunch of the homes that are built in Vermont and the repairs and the renovations that are done in Vermont are done by people who are wonderful at what they do, but they may not be spending their nights on the internet trying to figure out how to do better building science.
Thank you.
That's what my husband does.
Center Alliance.
Well, it's very interesting as you're talking. I'm thinking through various analogies to limit state control, but to allow for some of the professional development that you're talking about. And I don't know what have you thought about in terms of having some oversight for enforcement and education, including a possible professional board or professional group? Is there a professional group out there that can provide information to peers? And
excellent question.
We're going beyond rules right now, so I don't want to start going down this path, but maybe it would be better to have a conversation another time. But
I appreciate the question, and I think it is an excellent question because I don't think it is a super easy answer to the question because we do not have the infrastructure behind a building code, a plumbing code, and an electrical code. I don't know how many people here have tried to get a state electrical inspection or a state plumbing inspection, but it is a interesting process. I would suggest that everybody call for one and work your way through that and figure out if that's the infrastructure that is robust enough to take on additional capacity. I would argue that there's significant challenges there, but there's a lot of smart people in the state and we can solve those types of things. If we have the goal of solving and providing that support, the department has a bunch of brilliant folks that could do it. The fire safety has a bunch of folks that could do it, but there needs to be, in the wonky language of these code things, the authority that has jurisdiction. Jason talked about when there's differences between these two things, the question about, well, that's a legal question. I don't know when it really starts. Well, who do we go to when we don't know when it really starts? There has to be the answer to that question. It needs to be someone, whether it's the department or the fire safety or whomever it is, but we need to know what that answer is as the people out there executing these rules.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Jim Bradley? He's on there. Okay, sorry.
Yes.
And Jim is the project developer manager with Haywood Design Build.
And too many other titles after my name as well, unfortunately. But and that lends credence to part of what I want to bring today to the table as part of the discussion, is the fact that I've been in the building trades for approximately 30 years. I've been in the high performance weatherization and high performance building niche, if you will, for the last 18 years. I'm an energy partner with Efficiency Vermont. I perform inspections for, just a normal builder out there to meet RB standards. I'm basically involved in almost every aspect of this industry. Myself, along with many others in the Home Builders Association, were instrumental in getting the contractor registry passed. The whole reason I joined the VBRA, Vermont Builders and Remodelers Association, originally is because of the major errors I kept seeing in the field by doing these building inspections, the weatherization inspections, energy audits, things like that, by well-intended contractors who just didn't know better, who just basically didn't have the proper building science training and understanding to move forward, and they were creating issues. Back in 2015, when the latest iteration of Arby's was being passed, we were at the Better Buildings by Design conference, which is a wonderful training opportunity that the state offers every year through Efficiency Vermont. Dave Keefe was speaking about the latest updates, and I said, raised my hand. I said, well, who's going to be enforcing these to make sure that they're done right? And he said, basically litigation. And then I had the epiphany that day that someone like myself, who's going in after the fact on new builds and are finding problems that are happening within the first year, within 5 years and 15 years, where they don't meet the code, I'm going to be stuck in court as a witness. I've been involved in those cases since then, and it's not pretty. It offers no consumer protection the way things are being done right now. I've watched it where there's one couple that retired up to Isle Lamont. They were involved in litigation for 6 years on a brand new build. The builder went out of business. They've spent $200,000. I didn't stutter. $200,000 in legal expenses. There's your upfront cost. It's very expensive. You know, that's $200,000 in legal expenses to litigate this case. And to this day, even though they prevailed, they're bitter as can be. You know, they feel like they've been, duped and everything else. And that's how they're going to live throughout their retirement. That's one of so many stories that have moved past the anecdotal cautionary tales to the reality of what we're dealing with on a daily basis. Saturday, I'm going to another house that is failing because the builder didn't get the building science right. 2 weeks ago, I went to a house that wasn't foam insulation. It was cellulose done wrong by a builder in the high performance tier with Efficiency Vermont. And he disregarded the information that they gave to him on how to build the assembly appropriately. And he just thought, well, this is fine. This is the way I've always done it. Now, after 5 years, this client is going to have to go ahead and take off their roof and replace everything underneath at a cost of $75,000 to $100,000 or more. So the upfront cost argument, I say, it should be nullified. Whether it's $13,000, $18,000, $28,000 to meet the energy standards, it's the after the effect cost that is huge. And it's not just about the damage that is being done on a regular basis to our buildings because of people not understanding building science in climate zone 6, one of the most extreme in our nation in Vermont. It's because they don't understand these dynamics that these mistakes continue to happen. And when that is left in the lap of the client, where they have to go remediate things, fix things, rebuild things, spend that extra cash, that's a waste of our resources that are in finite supply. It's a waste of our builders who are in finite supply, and it affects the housing crisis overall because you have to spend time to go backwards and fix things. Someone at the Energy Committee meeting a few weeks ago said, oh, if we don't adopt this right now, we're just kicking the can down the road when Representative Higley proposed his change for pausing things. And I said, it's not kicking things down the road. And it's not like we're going to go backwards. We're already going backwards in our building industry by the errors that are being propagated. It's about not wanting to drive off the cliff. And you are listening to people that you'll hear from architects today. You're hearing from engaged builders who aren't worried about the bottom line. They're worried about the damage that is being done. And we have climate change goals. We have goals that we're trying to make sure the global warming reduction goals are being met, but we're not getting there just by setting goals if we're not ensuring that they're being done appropriately. To the education component, I sought out the education myself to become a BPI certified auditor, to become a passive house certified verifier, a passive house certified builder, and now a HERS energy rater with ResNet. So I'm going into these homes with those type of, goggles on and seeing how things are done. And I see on a daily basis where builders, some great builders, they're out there and I applaud them. Others where they fall short of the mark, where they're not hitting the air tightness levels. And then they turn to me and say, well, I've got to close on my house. And I know I didn't meet I got 4 air changes per hour instead of 2. What do? It's self-certifying, right? I said it is, but I don't recommend that. They're signing the certificate anyway and calling it good because there's a 6-year statute of limitations and for being found out for not complying with Arby's before, and if you reach that mark, then you're not on the hook for it anymore. And so builders are taking those chances, and they shouldn't be. They shouldn't be taking those chances because that affects the consumers. It affects the health and safety of the building occupants. When your indoor air quality starts to suffer because of bad ventilation, mold, rot, whatever. And as we, that affects your health and safety, but that our buildings are becoming more and more susceptible to these issues, the tighter we make them and the type of materials we're using. Some people don't know this, but all it takes in our building during our heating season is for a 1 inch by 1 inch hole inside of a piece of sheetrock to allow for up to 30 quarts of water to move into that wall cavity. If it moves in and it can't dry out, you've got a perfect recipe for mold. And so many homes that I go to, I'm finding these things. And these aren't homes that were built 100 years ago. These weren't built, 30 years ago, 40. They're built within the last few decades or the last few years. So it's the education component and the enforcement, the inspection, the verification that is so important to make this right. And to say that we have to adopt, we have to move forward. We're moving backwards as we're trying to move forward. So the pause is requested. I applaud the energy standards. As a passive house builder, I understand that you can make a home to, as was brought up earlier, to where you may spend 15% more up front to get a passive house certified home. But when you look at the overall energy cost and durability and everything else, it pays for itself. It's just getting the mortgage companies to accept that you're paying 15% more for a house that doesn't necessarily have comparables on the market, but it does work. But that's because passive house comes with its own set of checks and balances. You have to have it rated. You have to have it verified that you're building it appropriately. Your builders have to be trained in it to make sure that they're building the assembly appropriately. And with the new materials that we're using, we went from old growth lumber to new growth lumber, which is very susceptible to moisture if it's not managed appropriately. We went from regular sheet goods of plywood like CDX plywood, which is really resilient and dries out when it gets wet, to OSB, which is made up of the leavings or the leftovers of the lumber industry. And that is very susceptible. Many in our industry call that vertical mulch because when it gets wet, it degrades very, very quickly. So with the educational opportunities that we should have, with the verification items that we should have, there are ways to have this be accomplished. Other states are doing it. I was on a call with the National Association of the Home Builders, where often I've heard it, the builders are kind of vilified, thinking that, well, they're just worried about their bottom line. That's not the case in this situation. That's not what we're talking about here. Even the National Association of Home Builders, from Colorado to Ohio to Massachusetts, the people I heard from yesterday, this is a real problem. From Texas, where you have the more extreme climate issues in the sense of temperature differentials, from the very hot south and southeast and southwest to our northern tier here, it becomes a big issue if you don't get your building science right, if you don't get vapor drive right, ventilation, indoor air quality. If you don't manage this appropriately, it's going to do what it's going to do. And I say often, building science will not respect our best intentions or our ignorance. It's going to do what it's going to do. And if we don't take the time to make sure people get ahead of that, we are running a fool's errand here. And that's the big concern. I spoke to an insurance provider that's part of the home.
Mr. Bradley,
Yes.
I asked that you wrap this up.
Yes, sir. Most definitely. So this is another big, down the road, but not too far issue is I spoke to an insurance agent with our association, and he said what he's seen across the nation, more and more mold issues come up to where it is when those increase that the insurers are dropping their insured, that they're actually leaving states and things like that. And we have only 2 insurers that insure home builders in the state of Vermont. Though there are different agents, there's only 2 main providers. If they start saying that Vermont's not worth the risk because they have great standards, but they're setting up for failure, some of these assemblies or many of these assemblies, then they'll back out. And that's a big concern for our industry. And that's going to really affect the housing side. So what we're saying is for S100, it allows for the mechanism to be in place, for ARBIs to be studied, for it to be appropriately managed, to make the appropriate suggestions to the legislature before we push forward again, knowing that the damage for the previous iteration is already being done, is now coming to light. We don't want to repeat the same problem once again. So that's why I say, let's make the educated decision to push pause and get things in place to support this appropriately. If I build a house, I want a proper foundation to make sure it's going to last. I don't want to get a weak foundation or sand and expect that it's going to stay up on its own. It won't. And I'll entertain any questions. Thank you.
Questions?
I have a question later for Senator Bragg.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bradley.
Sure thing.
We have Sandra Vitchio.
Hold on. Oh, well, hold on 2 seconds. I'm just trying to figure out Uh, I just pushed too many buttons. Hold on 2 seconds. Can someone, I'm afraid I can't figure, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, okay, oh, good. Thank you for giving me the video button. I am in France today, and I have been here working on environmental improvement, sustainable design improvements for buildings. And thanks for letting me speak. I'm a member of the AIA, but I'm speaking for myself. I just quickly want to go through the list of things Vermont is missing as in completely. Basic education for builders, training for state staff that would help builders, an appeals process, variance process, and that is very important for historic buildings, or if there's a problem that's been discovered. Conflict resolution with other parts of the building. Someone's already talked about all the building systems involved. Project review, inspection during construction, certification once the building's complete, enforcement, and performance data. Honestly, we in Vermont have no idea how our buildings that are underneath the current energy code are actually performing and what the percentages of failures. So I want to make a quick analogy. If we could think about this race to being sustainable, let's call it net zero construction for all buildings, maybe even existing and new in the entire United States. There might be 50 racers, competitors, each one a state. And some are walking towards the goal, some are sprinting towards the goal. And here is Vermont with a bandage tied around our 2 legs because we don't have those things. We cannot do anything but stumble forward. And compared to everyone else, we are most definitely falling behind. You've already been given the number of the HERS goals. That's just one small metric. We can't even compare ourselves with other states because we can't even do these other metrics. So we are crippled by our own lack of acknowledging our problem. I want to suggest 2 things today. I would like to suggest either delaying this proposed adoption, or I'd also like to suggest an alternative, which would be to strike all technical improvements, anything related to performance, and let public service fulfill their requirement by submitting something that is just whatever it needs to be for, basic mundane things, so that they could fulfill the letter of their requirements. I need to point out the risk. Others already have done that, but this is for residential construction. I know a lot of people who almost their entire savings is in their house. And I know I had a client, for example, who just bought a house and it had been approved by an inspector. And when we started to look at it in order to do renovation, we found that all of the exterior insulation had totally rotted away. The house was only 7 years old. The windows were literally just hanging there. This is actually not uncommon. Most architects know horror stories like this. So what happens to a couple like this? They either get insurance or they don't get insurance payment, but somebody needs to pay. That means a big lawsuit which will go on for years, partly because we have no structured building code in Vermont, and there's really none of these normal processes to ensure that the energy code is followed correctly. So years in court. Meanwhile, that family really runs a risk of bankruptcy, because if they had a mortgage on the house, that's all kind of blown apart too. So the other serious problem, this was a newly purchased house, is people who live in these buildings. The health damage can be enormous. I myself know someone who was reduced to using a walker, and she had been a marathon runner. And that was from mold in her house. So we are not trying to save cost during construction by any means. I think all architects I know are in favor of trying to join the national race towards sustainable buildings. We are terrified of the personal and the financial risks involved, mostly for our clients. We're afraid of just fellow residents in Vermont. We see this coming, and we've been actually, to be honest, begging the state for 20 years now to address this problem. And we really need to put our foot down because it is so serious. It gets more serious with every update in the code. I will just close by saying that, oh my gosh, my jet lag is terrible. I'd like to close by saying that I have great respect for the Public Service Department. I know that Kelly and her crew are doing as much as they can underneath the restrictions and the requirements of statute. But I've got to point out that they have no way to follow failures. They probably get some reports, but my guess is they're not aware of most of these examples that we've discussed today. Secondly, there is some major miscommunication in that they are not doing basic education, and really not doing much in advanced education either. I run a group called Build Safe Vermont that is a combination of builders, architects, and public officials. Our small group does as much as we can, but there is a huge hole. And then the third thing, I just have to say this, is I am kind of appalled that we architects and all the advisors, well, many advisors on the advisory council to the public service have been saying this is a huge, significant problem. And yet public service is continuing to go forward with updates because they're required to, but they are not turning back towards the legislature and saying, we can't do this anymore. Please give us or give somebody in Vermont authority, because this is an untenable situation. Vermont deserves to have the bandage taken off of our legs, because then we can sprint and we can not only catch up, but we'd like to lead the nation. Thanks.
Thank you. Senator Bray.
Just a quick question. So thank you for your testimony. Have you submitted written testimony? Because you listed off a series of things missing, and I couldn't write it fast enough. So I'm just wondering if you submitted written testimony.
So yes, sir, I did. And I didn't list it so neatly, but if you look at my testimony, there's like an appendix on the back.
Yep.
And it is actually the submission I made last year to public service, which they responded that they couldn't look at it because they have no authority for administration. But in it is all the text that is missing from Vermont Energy Code that should be reinstated. The most of that language comes from the Model Energy Code, which is a national code called the IEC FCC. And the language, and then I suggested some other things. So it's a little bit messy, but the yellow highlighted portions are what I suggest as improvements to text.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. If someone could please turn off my video, because I have so many, I don't know how to turn it off. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kisum. John Alden.
Hi, can you hear me?
The last two folks, John and Robert, don't want to minimize your testimony at all, but we're hearing a lot of the same things. So if you think about it as you work through your testimony, going to run out of time here. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm John Alden. I own a architectural firm in Essex Junction, and I'm here on behalf of my experience and the AIA Vermont Public Policy Committee, which I chair. And we've been tracking this situation with the rules and the enforcement and the lack of the proper administration for a number of years. And we don't mean to drag this through the mud because we know you'd like to work on it. I know that the rulemaking setup with the code at the moment doesn't allow for those elements to be there, and we just continue to remind our legislators and senators that this is really important. You know, as we've heard, the building science is not easy anymore. We all thought we knew how to build buildings 20 years ago, but as we learn more about what happens in the walls and how we tighten things up and we add layers for insulation and we add layers for waterproofing and we add layers for vapor proofing and so on, if you get them wrong, real damage occurs. And we've pointed out a couple of things in this iteration of the code that maybe Bob will get into when he speaks, but there were some wall assemblies that were actually not quite right for this climate zone, and that's a big deal because that will lead to failure. So we wanted to point that out, and we really appreciate that you're listening to all of us, not only at this hearing, but hopefully others. We're extremely excited that S100 passed with the provision for a study committee. We are ready to help with that if in any way that we can. Our experienced AIA members in the state of Vermont handle these kind of things every day. We have our licenses on the line every day with our ability and design work in order to solve these things. Mostly in the commercial world with CBs, which is coming up next on your agenda, but also in RBs where the playing field is a little different in terms of the players and the enforcement. So we continue to urge you to try to find a better way. The state deserves a better way to manage the energy code. We feel that it should get lumped in with the rest of the building codes where there is a process. There are people you can talk to. We work with the Division of Fire Safety and their inspectors all the time on particular problems, and it's a great relationship and it leads to better building products in the state of Vermont. So do as much as you can to get us there with the residential piece and the building codes for energy. Try to get to that same level of experience and back and forth that it takes to do a great job for our Vermont citizens. Thank you.
Questions? Thank you, John. Appreciate it. Robert Duncan.
For some reason, my name is up on the screen, but I'm here in person. Thank you. So my name is Bob Duncan. I'm a founding partner and current employee of Duncan Distribution FC Architecture in Burlington. We've been in practice for nearly 40 years, and I started my work in Vermont in 1974 after graduating from college. A passion of mine has been energy efficiency. In some ways, I think that the code that's being presented to us doesn't go far enough. It's not going to help us meet our climate goals. But having said that, it is it would be inappropriate for the code to go further because we don't have the skill set, we don't have the enforcement mechanism to honor that advance. Our firm, just to be clear, our firm was the first firm to have designed, our partner designed the first passive house multifamily building in Vermont. We have exceeded the energy code in every building we've done for the last 25 years. We've worked very closely with Efficiency Vermont. Many of their programs don't exist anymore. The type of, the degree of energy efficiency that we could achieve with the programs that were there from Efficiency Vermont led us to exceed code requirements in every case. And therefore, we were able to institute building science principles that don't result in mold and other remediation problems. Everyone's talked a lot about enforcement. It's really key. I would like us to think about in this room, because all of you folks have influence when you leave this room in your other roles in the legislature. I'm sure you're aware that we have building codes in Vermont. And can you imagine if the building codes in Vermont said, these are the building codes. We're going to put them in front of you, and now I want you and you and you to follow the building code. There's no inspector, there's no plans review, there's no understanding, no person to go to when there's a conflict in the code. You would have codes that are not in effect, and Vermonters would not be safe. The same exact thing is true in the energy code. We have a code that we say, here's the code, and there's no mechanism whatsoever for enforcement of that or compliance with it. And because the compliance is someone signing a document, in my case, I signed a document that says I designed the building according to the code. And the builder who builds that building says, I built it the way the architect designed it. So he's off the hook. I'm on the hook. If there's no architect involved, the builder says, I built it according to code. Many builders, even well-intentioned ones, don't understand building science. And when you think about building science, think of another analogy. Throughout human history, we've warmed ourselves in various ways, but I think it started with a campfire. And then it maybe moved to a fireplace, and then it maybe moved to a coal stove, and then it maybe moved to an oil boiler or furnace, and then maybe to a wooden pellet stove. But the way we've heated and comforted ourselves for millennia is by applying more heat to the fire. Building science is now all about energy conservation. It's about climate change. It's about reducing our use of fossil fuels. And when we do that, we start insulating buildings. We start, as John mentioned, we've got water vapor, we've got vapor control, we've got insulating layers. It's a whole new science that's been maybe thought about for 40 years. I mean, maybe there's people thinking about it 50 years ago, but I think I'm probably the oldest person in the room. So I think my parents might have been the first generation that actually sky on the wall when they wanted to get warmer. It wasn't just like throw more wood in the fire. And so this whole concept of building science is new. It's not taught. It's taught in schools now, in colleges, but it's not taught to most builders. We don't have a mechanism in place in the state. So even when builders try to do the right thing, they might not know how to do the right thing. And I'll just close with just one other just brief story that I think highlights the lack of enforcement and understanding of building codes in Vermont. Earlier in my career, I did a fair amount of single-family home development, not development, but design. And in recent years, I've done less and less of that. But a couple of years ago during the pandemic, a former client asked me if I'd help them out with an addition to their home. They wanted to do an accessory dwelling unit. And so they didn't have a big budget. We worked on the design, and we depended a lot on developing some specifications that outlined the scopes of work. And one of the first pieces in the outline specification was the builder must comply with our piece. The builder must comply with our piece. It's a state law, right? Make it available, make it known. They only found one builder who ever even heard of our piece. I think that's shocking. I think it's really shocking. They tried and tried and tried during this pandemic to find a builder, and they only found one that knew RVs existed. So that goes back to this 54% compliance rate that's optimistic in 2015. It's going to be less in 2023. So while I applaud the development of the energy codes and the hard work that everybody on this side of the room has put into developing this, please bring back to the rest of the legislature how important this enforcement issue is. It's analogous to you wouldn't have pull stations in here, and you wouldn't have fire alarms, and you wouldn't have sprinkler system in this building if it was left to just some guy building the building or renovating the building who thought he complied with the code. So I can't enforce that more. Thank you.
Representative Bonkamp.
So I've heard everybody use the term enforcement, and I'm sitting here thinking, isn't the real issue training?
Well, training would be
people actually, my guess is, would want to do the right thing, and it sounds like the issue is they don't know how. Or they're not. So which is it both, or is it one or the other? Or both,
I think it's both, and some of the training would happen through the enforcement process. I think, as Jason mentioned, in Massachusetts, there's a system in place to do that. Training could happen in lots of ways, but we're asking builders to go out and build and to work from 7 to 4 and then order materials at night and do this and that. And oh, by the way, we want you to understand what the permitting is of your vapor barrier. We want you to understand what the R value is of the installation. We want you to understand that the continuous installation on the outside of a wall, it's got to be at least 50% of the cavity wall installation so that you can be pretty much guaranteed the wall's not going to rot. A lot of people don't have time to figure this out.
So it's training.
And where does that happen? And like for architects, for instance, a lot of that training happens through webinars, through going to seminars, to going to conferences and so on. And that can happen. I think, with Paul Silver, I think he mentioned he does that sort of thing as a builder. I think that's possible, but you have to have the interest first. And if the hammer of enforcement isn't there, then maybe the interest isn't there. I talked to Jason once, or he was on a seminar where he described a scenario where, a client was asked, well, would you rather have more installation that's going to save, $25 a month on your energy bill, or would you rather have granite counters in your kitchen? And a lot of consumers are going to say, $25 doesn't make that much difference. I'd rather have granite counters. Well, we can do that because no one's going to come in and see what the insulation is in your walls. Now, having said all of that, I actually don't have a lot of faith that you will develop code enforcement for the energy codes. Maybe you will for commercial buildings. But because we don't have any code enforcement whatsoever, but for a few municipalities in Vermont on single-family homes, that's a big nut to crack. And to try to layer energy code enforcement in a state where there is no single-family code enforcement, whether you have the right handrail in your house, or whether you have the right installation, or whether you have the right amperage in your electrical panel, none of that is required in the state of Vermont, but for a few municipalities. Montpelier has that, Burlington has that, Winooski has that. I think
State buildings have that.
Excuse me?
State buildings.
State buildings have that, of course. Public buildings have that, but single-family homes do not have that. And so that's part of why a lot of these problems that people are talking about exist. And we haven't talked about problems today when we talk about enforcement that go beyond the energy code. We've only talked about problems with the energy code and the rot that happens. But what about the fire? There was a bill in the legislature a while ago to require, before every house was sold, to put fire blocking in houses. It was an untenable problem to solve. But if we had a building code, there'd be fire blocking in single-family homes. But there's nobody to enforce that. So when a fire starts in your kitchen and there's no fire blocking between you and the floor above, that fire spreads quickly. So it's a bigger nut to crack. I really hope the legislature looks at this wholeheartedly and with open arms, not only energy code, but also code enforcement. And the International Residential Code would be a place to start. That takes dollars, it takes staff, it takes training, but I think we have perhaps one of the most strict energy codes in the country in Vermont. And I think all of us can pat ourselves on the back for that. But if we don't have a way to enforce it, if we don't have a way for it to move forward and be correct, then we're kidding ourselves. We have the greenest state in Vermont, but we're kidding ourselves if we think we're going to climate change goals with a code that's not enforced.
Any more questions? Senator McDonald.
S100, one of the provisions is that it encourages and facilitates taking older, large houses and dividing them up and putting apartments in them. I live in an old farmhouse and have experienced putting on sun porches, foaming of the basement. I read in Fear the
bigger article,
the article in this last week. And, you know, what am I going to do with the sills that are now covered with foam and I went on longer than I intended to, but I also, been pulling over last summer on a Saturday morning, listening to VPR of a 2-hour, seemed like a 2-hour discussion of where the frost barrier was and how you had to know where that was before you did anything in a home to make improvements. And if you failed to do that, you were bringing about disaster. The first witness today said, yes, we have these codes and they have flexibility. And, you know, a code with flexibility, if you don't follow it and you have a bill to build new bathrooms and kitchens in homes that were built over 100 years ago, what do we look forward to?
I'm not exactly sure what the question is in that.
We're authorizing and encouraging builders and homeowners to take 100-year-old homes and to divide them up and put, you know, apartments and kitchens and bathrooms in the home, in places that they did not exist.
And it requires a keen understanding of what the envelope of that building is and what the foundation system is. And so that means that people that have to be knowledgeable about doing it, I could say that architects are knowledgeable about doing that, and I think most are. Not every builder is. Some builders are. So people could maybe undertake some of that work themselves. But you raise it. You raise a sort of an interesting ancillary point for me, which is that we have a movement in the state to electrify our buildings, and if we can have green energy so that we can electrify our buildings, then we can reduce our use of fossil fuel. And the clean heat standard was one of those things that, you know, that promotes that. But one of the things that we're trying to do statewide is use heat pumps to heat our buildings. And heat pumps will do that, and cold climate heat pumps will do that if the envelope is correct. And they won't do it if the envelope is incorrect. So I'm going way off text here in terms of this, but this question raises that. And I think once again, because you folks you disseminate in the legislature and you have influence in other places, just putting a heat pump in your house is not going to solve your heating problem if you don't have the proper envelope to support that. And I can't make that more strenuously, that point. So people really need to be aware of that, because some folks are saying I put a heat pump in, I took my old furnace out, I put a heat pump in. Geez, I'm cold, or my bill went to $700 electricity last month. Well, because it's not efficient at more than 15 below, and your house isn't insulated properly. Somebody has to tell folks that.
Thank you.
Just a quick comment back. So there's plenty of work to do. This is a long-term discussion. We've been having this discussion for years. There's been a lot of pushback on compliance, enforcement, education has come up as part of the weatherization for all work. You know, we're putting $100 million plus to enhance weatherization, which included a task force on training. And so feeling like personally, I want to come back to all this again. And the S100 thing, and the heat pump piece of affordable heat, I would just want to sort of put on the record, there was never a recommendation to put in heat pumps regardless. It was always smart installation that addressed exactly what you were talking about.
I understand that, although I have heard anecdotally lots of people putting heat pumps thinking the panacea to the problem. But to your point, Senator Bray, about this has been going on for a long time, it hasn't been going on for a long time. That's why I don't have a lot of faith that we're going to actually implement something soon. It's important as it is. But some folks have said that, you know, if we don't accept the code as presented, that we're kicking the can down the road. We've been kicking the can down the road of enforcement for 20 years. And that's something that I know it involves money, I know it involves bureaucracy, I know it involves all sorts of things. But absent that, we're just patting ourselves on the back with our energy code and saying, haven't we done a great job? Look at how smart we are because we have a great energy code.
So we don't usually get into discussion mode, but I'll say really quickly, I hope that the entire community that's turning out to express concern about implementation of this code turns out as vigorously to support a compliance mechanism, a registration mechanism, all the things that will build the infrastructure.
Absolutely. I can attest on behalf of AIA Vermont that we're there to do that. I think John actually even mentioned it in his presentation. We were very supportive of the contractor registry.
Yes.
As you know, there isn't a licensing, there's no contractor licensing in Vermont, so anybody with a hammer and a pickup truck is a builder. And that's not necessarily good for all Vermonters. And if we had a licensing program, if we had a registration program that was effective, then we could say, as a condition of the continuance of your license, you have to have some education. We architects have to have 25 credits a year. We have to go out and find that and do that. Builders don't have to do that. And if there was a mechanism in place for registration and licensing, you could impose that, and that would be another way of, and you could say that, I don't know what the number is, 10 credits a year for builders to start with. 5 of those have to be in energy efficiency or building science, and 3 have to be in, I don't know, concrete and how to flash roofs. I don't know, but they're absent of those sorts of things in a way to enforce that. We're not making progress, and we're kicking the can down the road.
Senator Lyons?
I have a question for Senator Bray.
Okay.
But, so, I mean, I'm hearing what I'm hearing you say is that you have had testimony on this, the lack of enforcement, the lack of training, the lack of oversight, the lack of certification in committee. And that S100 is inclusive of some of those issues. And then I'm hearing that from folks who are testifying. Is that?
That is correct. Both sides. Yep.
Okay, well, and and I'm a strong proponent of very strong and robust RVs and have been for many years. But I'm also hearing that by putting RVs in place without other considerations, we're actually doing a disservice to the state of Vermont, to people in the state. And so I have a notion that two things. First being that letters to committees of jurisdiction, a letter to committees of jurisdiction would be really appropriate, as well as to Department of Public Service, as well as to Public Safety, because I have worked with them on building codes in other situations. So those two, that's one, a letter. And they perhaps are 2 different letters, but could be considered the same. And the other is I'm feeling really uncomfortable right now about putting something in place that isn't going to happen, and that in some cases is going to cause significant problems. So, and I'm looking to Senator Bray, you made the original motion with, so I'm sort of thinking we ought to hold off on this and be certain that we can get it right. I have huge respect for the folks in the department who have worked on this. I know that they're doing due diligence.
Right, and it's an amended motion to have implementation pushed off till 12/1/23.
So my question would be, if it's pushed off to 12/1, that doesn't resolve the other issues that need some legislation. And I can see your room filled with people who are going like this, because I understand nobody wants to have training or certification to put a nail in the wall. But but I think that we might be better off sending this out until March 2024 as a closest time. But I'll let you think about that.
Senator Bray?
So thanks for all that. I mean, I share your concerns, and we face vetoes over trying to be more assertive about how we regulate this space. So it's It's not for lack of effort. I don't mean to say that in a defensive way, but just it has been sort of tough sledding. And even though we know there's an issue. And so with that, though, I'm wondering if, in terms of council, there's a statutory obligation on the part of the department to on a regular cycle, present revisions to the code. I think it's a 3-year cycle, right? So I'm just wanting to understand whether or not putting off, delaying, whatever we would be talking about would run contrary to statute.
So the RBs and the CBs are slightly different in that the CBs have that 3-year language. So the RBs say, and this is in 30 VSA section 51, subsection C, in the intro part, it says, after January 1, 2011, the commissioner, and that's of the public service, shall ensure that appropriate revisions are made promptly after the issuance of updated standards for residential construction under the IECC. What prompt is not defined, but it has been, I believe, since 2018. Did I get that right?
2020.
2020. Since 2020, since this was last updated, and the most recent IECC, that was 2021, right? I'm expecting the next one in 2024. So if you delay, you're sort of bumping up against the next cycle of revisions to the IECC. In terms of what Lcar has the power to do, you can object. You can say that it's inconsistent with statutory authority. You can say or that there isn't the authority for the rulemaking. You can say it's inconsistent with legislative intent. There are other grounds that you can object on it, but Lcar cannot say you can't move forward with adopting this rule absent what Representative Higley had proposed as something that would have been coming from the General Assembly, not from Lcar itself, where I think you have some wiggle room on the effective date piece comes in the fact that that's the text of the rule saying when it becomes effective, and that's not something that Lcar can do unilaterally. Lcar cannot amend a rule to say this rule now has an effective date of March 1, 2024. If the department, as the adopting agency, thinks that they have the flexibility to do that under the prompt piece here, I think that's a different discussion. And I don't know if that's something that they feel comfortable with in interpreting what shall make prompt revisions is.
I'd like to just think. The 45-day review period ends 6/9. We have another meeting scheduled for 6/8. And I would put on the table that might take that opportunity to have more conversation and discussion with various parties, rather than try to make it that kind of decision right now within these few minutes. Senator Bray.
So I made the motion to be really clear about where I had landed. I still have confidence in the direction. The timing, I think, is a question, and we don't want to have unintended. So I'd like to withdraw the motion, and especially given that I think you're saying I would substitute amendment for the motion would be postpone action.
2 weeks.
22P28 until our next meeting.
Just one second.
As long as our shot clock times out properly.
Anthony?
So the thing I'm just pointing out is on your rules pending, it says that the 45 days is up on 6/7/2022, so we know that's not right. And then on your agenda, it says 6/9/2023. I'm concerned that 45 days is 6/7/2023, and that you'll miss it by a day, and you would need to get an extension from them. Do you know what it's? Okay, so they can choose to meet on June 8th. Do you know when this was filed? When you received it? So we can recount the 45 days? So I think what you need to do is recount the 45 days. Charlene will confirm when she received the rule.
It says that it was received.
It says it was received today. Recount your 45 days, make sure that your June 8th meeting would cover the 45 days. And then when you get to your final item of the day, which is approving the out of session meeting schedule, which doesn't currently have a June 8th meeting scheduled, just make sure you say that you're going to meet on June 8th, which you totally can do. This just has you going from May 25th to June 15th.
So received May 2nd.
Received May 2nd. So 45 days from May 2nd would be?
Oh, God, don't do that.
May 17th, something like the 15th.
You have a copy.
I'm so sorry. We did file our rules on 2 different days. I believe Arby's was 4/25.
That would make sense with the saying 5/25 being a
I
typo.
don't have the file with me.
Okay. So if it was filed on 4/25, we'll now attempt to count. It's going to be 7, 14, 21, 28, 35, 42, 43, 44, 45. I do think it is June 9th of 2023. I think you have the one day.
Okay.
You're nodding. Do you agree that that's the one?
I haven't looked at it. I don't want to, I wouldn't presume.
When we're not in, I think the department would be okay with giving a waiver
if it's not the 45 days.
As long as
Yeah.
we're concerned about bumping up against the 6-month
Yeah.
deadline.
Or the 8 months deadline.
Yeah.
If we would have the 8-month deadline this waiver, we would have no problem.
Yeah, so your 8-month deadline is 6/27/2023,
Right.
according to this.
So we're okay with timing right now.
Yep.
Representative Bonner.
Before we end today, I'd be interested in giving it, and especially the contention that we might be doing more harm than good with this. I'd be interested in the department's response to that. Like, so but if you have.
Sure. Yeah, I did want to address the compliance issue. For compliance instead of enforcement for a very specific reason. What our goal is to get builders to comply with the code, with the minimum requirements. Enforcement is one method to do that. We're agnostic as to how we achieve higher compliance, and we're just in favor of more builders complying with the code. As to the questions about building science durability for buildings, any code, there's no way to write a code that can prevent problems from occurring. You can build the same wall assembly well, or you can build it badly, and the latter will deteriorate over time, quickly or not so quickly. What we have done, what we have the resources to do is to institute the Energy Code Assistance Center through Efficiency Vermont, which may or may not be taken advantage of by builders. The other thing that we've done is to, in our handbook, which is unique to RVs as opposed to CVs, we do an extensive building science section in the handbook, and we have used some federal money to beef that up this time around. So to the extent that builders are referring to that Energy Code handbook, they will have much more at their fingertips as far as education for building science. And finally, the builder registry that the legislature passed in the previous session, I think is a small step toward giving the department and Efficiency Vermont a way to reach out to raise awareness of the code, which will solve the issue of whether builders know about it. And it will also be a way for us to reach out to those builders with education materials, give them the resources like the Energy Code Assistance Center to take advantage of and learn more about building science. So these problems are minimized, if not eliminated.
Can I say something on top of that? Thanks. I just want to also add that Efficiency Vermont always does trainings after they have money in their budget to do so for Energy Code. As Keith said, we're hopeful that the registry will reach more builders and contractors than before. I suggest, we didn't talk about this during the code process because it wasn't completed, but I want to mention that the department did put almost $900,000 into one of our federal fundings, SUP, IIJA, or bill for BPI and building science trainings. So that will also be coming. And I just want to say too, I feel like some of the testimony is not acknowledging the pullback we did on the walls. Like we are not changing the wall insulation values in the proposal that we've have on the table. It's no different. The windows and the wall insulation has not changed from what is in existence. So a delay will not change that. So I just wanted to make sure that's clear. And one other thing that was said that I want to make sure it's clear was about a net zero goal. The department has not put forward a net zero getting to HERS of zero. We have said net zero ready is our goal, and we have not instituted an exact number. We had a goal that we were shooting for in this update, and frankly, it was, as we discussed, it was not cost effective. And part of our definition of net zero ready was that it must be cost effective. So I just want to make sure that's clear, given what was said. And then one last thing to what Sandy Vitzium and I think maybe Senator McDonald was talking about as far as historic buildings. There is and has been for many iterations in the RBs an exemption for historic buildings. So any builder can work with the State Historic Preservation Office and have an exemption to RBs if needed for an older building or home. So thank you.
Thank you. Senator Bray.
Since we're going to come back to this next time, one question I'm looking for an answer now, but is to ask the department and anyone advocating for the current schedule to help us better understand the impact of delaying at center lines suggested by several months, or honestly, if the point were to enable the legislature to address anything, I think we'd probably, practically speaking, need to delay to like 7/1/24 to have a legislative session complete itself. So I would put that on the table for something to discuss, so we can better understand what the implications are. Thank you.
I just make one comment about build cycle, just about build cycle, is that most new construction homes take at least 12 months from initial conversation to construction start, with most builders right now being under contract and booked into 24 and 25. That's the length of a cycle for new home construction. So 3 months.
Thank you.
This is Sandy Vitzium. May I quickly make one point?
Quickly.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. The question was asked earlier about the difference between education and enforcement. They are both underneath this big term in construction called authority having jurisdiction. That's the correct term for this whole umbrella. And explicitly, the public service has written in RBs that they do not have authority. It's written in black and white in the code. And that is what we are trying to get at, is the overall or arching authority. So quickly, because of like with historic buildings, often someone wants to improve them and make them more energy efficient, but there is no structure in place now to discuss with someone how to do that. That is one of the things an authority can do. And the second is that the assistance center at EVP.
Ms. Vitzium,
we're done.
Ms. Vitzium, we
Yep,
need to
I'm
close
sorry.
up testimony, okay? Thank
Okay.
you.
Sorry.
All right, we have a motion on the table. substitute motion, so we have to. Help me with this thing here.
The motion was a substitute motion to.
Just withdraw your motion?
Sure, I've learned from Senator McDonald to offer substitute amendments or substitute proposals. So I would ask the committee to allow me to withdraw the motion and offer a substitute, which is postpone action for 2 weeks.
Motion on the table. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Okay, thank you very much. This has been a long conversation, discussion. I think a good one. And we appreciate all your time and your energy from both Public Service Department and everybody else that's involved. So feel free to be in touch, and we'll be taking this up, and we're going to be moving everything that's on the agenda to the next meeting at 6:08.
I looked at your pending rule schedule. It looks like everything is fine to move. You've got another 6/7/22 on here, but that's the Cannabis Control Board emergency rule, and that's not one where you have to act within 45 days. I think you do probably want to adopt your out of session meeting schedule with June 8th added, just so people know your plans. So that would be meeting on May 25th. You met today on May 25th, adding in May 16th and June 8th. And then the only rule that you had scheduled for June 15th, which is the governing outage reporting requirements, that does not have a 45-day review period up until July 3rd. So you could bump that to June 29th. So you can meet on June 8th and then not again until June 29th if you wanted to.
That sounds like a good plan.
Okay, so we'll.
Ray?
The question was, are we meeting in this room on the 8th of June?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
So if it's at 6:08 and then.
Yeah, so it'll be 6/8, no June 15th, and then it'll be June 29th.
Okay, so we have someone want to offer a motion to accept that calendar? Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed?